when we have plenty of land and resources to be able to, you know, house those people and deal with
everything. How much
everything.
did you say? They control like 60% of
60% of the land in Utah. And
Yeah.
so the Utah legislature and governor have agreed that this is something they want to move forward on.
Yep. Well, going along those lines, this is from the Washington Times. DeMint, White House land grab. This is Senator Jim DeMint. It says, "You'd think the Obama administration is busy enough controlling banks, insurance companies, and automakers, and now we learn that they're planning to increase the control over energy-rich land in the West. A secret administrative memo has surfaced and reveals the plan to seize 10 million acres from Montana to New Mexico, which would stop the job-creating activities there, like ranching, forestry, certain mining and energy development. Not that I personally agree with all these kind of things and stuff, but I mean, this is just what it's doing as a result. And President Obama can enact such plans in that memo with just a stroke of a pen, without any input from the communities affected by it. And so this is happening under the Antiquities Act. President Carter, for example, locked up more land than any other president before him, taking up 50 million acres in Alaska despite opposition in the state. President Clinton used the authority 22 times to prohibit hunting, recreational vehicles, mining, forestry, and even grazing on almost 6 million acres around the country, and single-handedly created 19 new national monuments and expanded 3 others without consulting anyone. And so, I mean, these are kind of things that they're able to do generally. And so currently the government owns 650 million acres, which is about 29% of the nation's total land. So, I mean, we continue to see how they use these mechanisms that are in place to take all our land. So, ultimately we should...
And, of course, this isn't about real protection. The government doesn't truly go in and protect these areas.
No.
And they really are just buying them up and taking them to try and control resources and control... essentially our entire growth. Changing gears a bit here, our next article comes from Kaiven.org and is discussing Ron Paul, Congressman Ron Paul from Texas. In 2008, his congressional office returned $58,000 to the Treasury. In 2009, his office returned $90,000 to the Treasury. And now, according to an official press release, Dr. Ron Paul's office has just paid back $100,000 to the Treasury. This at a time he's running a surplus and paying back the American people when the federal government is, you know, doing record salaries and hiring record amounts of people, as we just saw with them up in the salaries of their staffers. And they're running all these deficits at the same time and, you know, issuing out IOUs and bailing out bankers. They're spending all of your money. You have some legitimate congressman like Ron Paul who's giving money back, who's putting money back in the Treasury, who's being fiscally responsible. This is the type of leadership we want to see in Washington.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is pretty much the opposite of what we're seeing right now. This next story coming from Business Week says that failed banks may get pension fund backing as FDIC seeks cash. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation is trying to encourage public retirement funds that control more than $2 trillion to buy all or part of the failed lenders, taking a more direct role in propping up the banking system. And so current rules pretty much don't prohibit this kind of activity of pension funds buying up failed banks. But this is what has happened before, for example, in like Argentina, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Argentina, of course, the same type of issues happened when the IMF took those people for everything they had, and they demanded the government do things like getting rid of public transportation and you know, taking pension funds. Yeah. And this is why people like us and others were able to predict this. We were able to say to everyone, look, they're going to come after your pension funds. They're going to take your pension funds and give it to the criminal bankers. We've known this because we've seen the operation. We've seen the modus operandi happen in all these other countries where the IMF and World Bank and these institutions have fleeced these nations.
Well, what happens is these many countries are pretty much screwed over by neo-colonialist policies and, you know, modern day slavery and manipulations by, you know, previous imperialist countries and whatnot. And then as a result of these manipulations and these corrupt central banking systems and whatnot, where the money's just a complete joke and whatnot, and then trade policies and things that end up disrupting agriculture and other industries in other countries. As a result, then they come in, they're like, oh, well, you owe a lot of money, so we're going to lend lend you, like the IMF, for example, we're going to lend you a whole bunch of money, which is all just fake, and they just print out nothing practically anyways. And then they say you need to have a structural adjustment policy. And so they say how we're going to tell you how to run your country when we give you money. And then generally they end up doing much worse with these SAPs, is what they call them, in place. And then they end up basically making even more of a killing off each country and consolidating more power and influence over them. So it's totally criminal.
Our next article comes from the Washington Post. A campaign stunt launches a corporate candidate for Congress. And this goes on to an issue we discussed a couple episodes back with David Cobb about the corporate control of elections and the new Supreme Court decision, which has allowed corporations to essentially be considered the same as people. Murray Hill Incorporated, a small 5-year-old Silver Spring public relations company, is seeking office to prove a point. After the Supreme Court declared that corporations have the same rights as individuals, they considered it was the next logical step. The guy who is the frontman for it says, now we can eliminate the middleman and run for office ourselves. You know, that's what the corporations need, I suppose. Why have these guys, if they're the so-called representatives of the people who really represent the corporations, when you could just put a corporation head, a nice PR guy up there?
And then they can put forward as much money as they want.
There you go. It'll be perfectly fine, and we can have the lovely fascist America that apparently this government is leaning towards.
Yeah, and then along those lines, this is from informationclearinghouse.info. Basically, this is a video. The title of it is "They Cook the Books." The video that will put Geithner behind bars, one of the greatest crimes ever perpetrated, is generally about how, like, we might as well have Goldman Sachs or, you know, these different banks just
Lehman Brothers.
Because, I mean, yeah, Lehman Brothers in this particular instance. But, I mean, you got, like, Geithner and Bernanke that are quite, like, rife with interest with these banking institutions. But anyways, here's a video from the Dylan Radigan show about Lehman Brothers being the next Enron.
And he even gets outraged as well, you'll see.
Well, good afternoon to you. Happy Friday to you. In America today, we are turning the pages of what may be our next bestseller. And unfortunately, this one is not fiction. Instead, it is a 2,200-page report, 15 months in the making, laying out nothing short of a criminal case against Lehman Brothers, whose collapse, you'll remember, a major signpost in the financial meltdown that we have still not recovered from, nor have we reformed the system that created it in the first place almost 2 years in. I want you to think Enron, accounting fraud, except this time the entire U.S. economy was brought to the brink, in part by one firm that was cooking its books. Enron basically brought California's power structure to the brink. Lehman, along with the rest of the banks, brought our entire country and the global economy to the brink. How'd they do it? Well, using a method, a complex method. Remember, complexity is how Wall Street steals, effectively. This was called a repo transaction. Simply put, a repo transaction is an agreement where one company transfers an asset to another company in exchange for short-term cash. Think of it like a pawn shop. But this exchange comes with the agreement that the borrower will pay back that cash and take back those assets, whatever they've pawned, effectively, at a specific date. It's usually done within a week or so. If you just need a little short-term cash, you got something that's illiquid, you give it to the repo guy, he gives you some cash, you move on. It's like me asking Governor Spitzer, who coincidentally happens to be here today, nice to see you, Governor, to lend me, let's say, I don't know, $50 billion for, I don't know, my trash can that's actually not worth anything. Are you up for that?
For you, Dylan, anything.
Right.
$50 billion is nothing.
Here's a trash can. $10 billion piece. Thank you very much. So now I have my $50 billion, and I'm able to hide my trash can. Now the governor doesn't care because he knows I'm going to pay back his $50 billion, and he's going to give me my trash can back in about a week. But while the bank regulators and Wall Street, while I have to file my quarterly report, I'm going to show them the $50 billion in cash. So while everybody's looking at my balance sheet, they see this, the $50 billion. Instead of the pile of troubled assets, or in my case, the garbage can. In Lehman's case, it helped them hide their debt, their garbage cans, from everyone while showing off their money, which allowed them to take more risk at Lehman Brothers and in the process pay themselves more money by perpetuating the fraud. This, of course, until the whole thing blew up. Now, keep in mind, when I talk about taking money, I really mean taking money. Lehman Brothers CEO Richard Fuld, for instance, paid himself with schemes like this, $500 million in personal compensation during his tenure at the firm, according to the FT.